There's a particular kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek validation or demand recognition. It's quiet, it's resilient, and it's forged in the fires of solitude. Carl Jung, the legendary Swiss psychiatrist, spent decades studying the human psyche. And through his work, he identified something profound. Women who've had to become strong on their own carry distinct psychological marks, not scars, but signatures of an inner power that most people will never fully understand. If you've ever felt like you had to face life's battles alone, if you've had to be your own hero when no one else showed up, this video is for you. Today we're diving deep into the 9 unmistakable marks of women who had to become strong on their own, according to Jungian psychology. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll see strength in a completely different light. But before we begin, if you find value in this content, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps this message reach more people who need to hear it. Now let's get started. Mark 1, the guarded heart. The first mark is what Jung called the guarded heart. Now this isn't about being cold or emotionally unavailable. It's something far more nuanced. Women who've had to be strong on their own have learned to build invisible walls, not to keep everyone out, but to protect what's sacred within. Here's the thing. When you've been disappointed enough times, when you've had to pick yourself up off the floor with no one there to help, your psyche develops a defense mechanism. Jung described this as the development of a protective anima, an internal guardian that screens who gets access to your emotional world. Let me tell you a story. I once knew a woman named Sarah. Successful, intelligent, warm with friends, but she had this quality that was hard to define. Men would often say she was hard to read or mysterious, but it wasn't game playing. It was something deeper. Sarah grew up as the eldest daughter in a household where she had to be the emotional caretaker for everyone. By the time she was 16, she'd learned that her own feelings were secondary, that expressing vulnerability meant being labeled as too sensitive or dramatic. So she adapted. She became strong. But that strength came with a price, a guardedness that even she didn't fully recognize until years later. The guarded heart manifests in specific ways. Women with this mark tend to share selectively. They'll tell you about their day, their opinions, their thoughts, but the deeper chambers of their emotional experience remain locked until trust is truly earned. And trust for them isn't built in days or weeks. It's constructed slowly, brick by brick, over time. They also have an uncanny ability to sense authenticity. Because they've had to rely on their own judgment for so long, they've developed an almost psychic ability to detect when someone is being genuine versus when someone is performing. Jung called this developed intuition through necessity. But here's what most people miss. The guarded heart isn't a flaw. It's a form of wisdom. It's the recognition that not everyone deserves access to every part of you. That protection of the self is an act of self-respect. If you have this mark, understand this. Your guardedness is not something to fix. It's something to honor while remaining open to the possibility that some people genuinely deserve your trust. Mark 2, radical self-reliance. The second mark is radical self-reliance. Women who've had to be strong on their own develop an almost instinctive independence that goes beyond typical self-sufficiency. This is about psychological autonomy at its core. Jung spoke about individuation, the process of becoming a complete, fully realized individual. For women who've had to stand alone, this process often happens earlier and more intensely than for others. They don't just learn to pay their own bills or change their own tires. They learn to regulate their own emotions, validate their own experiences, and make major life decisions without external affirmation. Let me break this down. Most people grow up with a support system: parents, siblings, partners, mentors who help them navigate difficult decisions and emotional turbulence. But women with this mark had a different experience. Maybe they had those people physically present but emotionally absent, or maybe they lost them early, or maybe those people were so unreliable that depending on them felt riskier than going it alone. Whatever the reason, these women learned a profound truth. The only person you can truly count on is yourself. This shows up in fascinating ways. They rarely ask for help even when they need it. Not because they're prideful, but because asking feels vulnerable in a way that's almost physically uncomfortable. They've internalized the belief that help either won't come or will come with strings attached. They make decisions quickly and trust their own judgment implicitly. While others might need to process with friends or family, these women have learned to trust their internal compass. They've had to. They also handle crisis with remarkable calm. When everyone else is panicking, they shift into solution mode. Jung described this as the activation of what he called the animus, the inner masculine energy that helps women take decisive action. But here's the shadow side. Radical self-reliance can become isolation if we're not careful. It can morph into a belief that needing anyone is weakness. It can prevent the formation of deep, interdependent relationships where both people lean on each other. If this is you, challenge yourself to ask for help with something small this week. Notice how it feels. Notice that the world doesn't collapse when you admit you can't do everything alone. Mark 3. Emotional autonomy. The third mark is emotional autonomy, and this is where things get really deep. Emotional autonomy is different from emotional independence. Independence suggests you don't need emotional connection. Autonomy means you don't need others to regulate your emotions for you. Jung talked extensively about emotional maturation and the integration of the shadow self, the parts of us we don't want to acknowledge. Women who've had to be strong alone have often had no choice but to face their shadows head on, without the buffer of someone else's comfort or reassurance. Here's what this looks like in practice. When something upsets them, they don't immediately call someone to vent or seek validation. They sit with the feeling first. They process internally. They've learned to become their own emotional container, to hold difficult feelings without needing someone else to make them feel better immediately. This doesn't mean they never share or seek support. It means they've developed the capacity to be with their own emotional experience first. I want to tell you about Maria. Maria grew up in a home where emotions were dismissed or ridiculed. If she cried, she was told she was being manipulative. If she was angry, she was called hysterical. So she learned to go to her room, close the door, and feel everything alone. By her 20s, Maria had an extraordinary capacity for emotional self-regulation. She could experience heartbreak, professional disappointment, or existential anxiety without falling apart. But she also struggled to let others into those experiences with her. Jung would say that Maria had developed her feeling function in isolation. She could access and name her emotions with precision, but she had difficulty allowing others to witness them. The gift of emotional autonomy is incredible emotional resilience. These women can weather storms that would devastate others. They have deep inner resources and a sophisticated understanding of their own psychological landscape. The challenge is vulnerability. When you've learned to process everything alone, letting someone else into that intimate space of emotional rawness feels almost dangerous. It feels like losing control. The integration point is this: emotional autonomy is a gift, but emotional intimacy is its complement. True strength isn't just the ability to handle emotions alone. It's also the courage to share those emotions with trusted others. Mark 4, hypervigilance. The fourth mark is hypervigilance, and it's one of the most misunderstood. When Jung studied trauma and adaptation, he recognized that the psyche develops protective mechanisms to prevent future harm. For women who've had to be strong, alone, often because past relationships or environments were unsafe, hypervigilance becomes an unconscious strategy. Let me be clear, this isn't paranoia. This is an adaptive response to real experiences, where letting your guard down had painful consequences. Women with this mark notice everything. They read micro-expressions. They track changes in tone. They notice when someone says they're fine, but their body language screams otherwise. They're constantly assessing environments and relationships for potential threats, not physical threats necessarily, but emotional ones. This manifests in several ways. They struggle to fully relax even in safe environments. There's always a part of their consciousness that's monitoring, evaluating, preparing. They're often the first to sense when something is wrong in a relationship or social situation. Others might miss the subtle shifts, but they catch them immediately. They have detailed plans for various scenarios. If this happens, they'll do that. If that person behaves this way, they'll respond like this. It's mental chess played constantly. Here's a story that illustrates this. I knew a woman named Jessica who had this quality. At parties, she'd position herself where she could see all the exits. She'd notice who drank too much, who was getting into conflict, who seemed uncomfortable. When I asked her about it, she laughed and said, "I guess I just like to know what's going on." But when we talked more deeply, she revealed that she'd grown up in an unpredictable household where moods could shift in an instant, where calm could become chaos without warning. She learned that survival meant constant awareness. Jung called this the perpetual readiness of the psyche. In healthy doses, it's intuition and street smarts. In excessive amounts, it's exhausting. The gift. These women are rarely caught off guard. They're excellent judges of character. They can navigate complex social dynamics with skill because they're reading 10 levels deeper than most people. The cost: the body never fully rests. The nervous system stays activated, and genuine relaxation becomes difficult because some part of you is always on duty. The healing path involves teaching your nervous system that it's safe to rest, that not every person is a potential threat, that you can let your guard down without being vulnerable to attack. This often requires professional support, because hypervigilance is a nervous system issue, not just a mental one. Mark 5, selective vulnerability. The fifth mark is selective vulnerability, and it's closely related to the guarded heart, but operates differently. Jung believed that true psychological health involves the integration of opposites, strength and vulnerability, independence and connection, protection and openness. Women who've had to be strong alone develop an intricate relationship with vulnerability. They're not vulnerable with everyone, not even with most people, but with the select few who've proven themselves trustworthy, they can be devastatingly open. This selective vulnerability has specific characteristics. First, it's earned, not given. While some people are naturally open and share freely, these women treat vulnerability like a sacred gift. You have to prove you can handle it responsibly. Second, it's tested, often unconsciously. They'll share something small and monitor how it's received. If it's met with respect, empathy, and discretion, they might share more. If it's dismissed, gossiped about, or weaponized later, the door closes, often permanently. Third, it's strategic. They won't be vulnerable when they're actually at their weakest. They'll wait until they've processed the majority of an experience, and then they'll share from a place of slightly more strength. This protects them from being vulnerable when they're truly defenseless. Let me tell you about Rachel. Rachel was incredibly successful, running her own business, traveling the world, seemingly having it all together. Most people saw her as bulletproof. But she had two friends, just two, with whom she was completely different. With them she could cry, admit fears, express insecurity, be messy and human. When I asked her how those friendships developed, she said they'd proven themselves over years. They'd shown up consistently. They'd kept her secrets. They'd never used her vulnerabilities against her in arguments or gossip. They'd earned the right to see her whole self. Jung would call this conscious vulnerability, deliberate choice rather than an unconscious default. The wisdom here is profound. Not everyone deserves access to your vulnerable self. And that's not only okay, it's healthy. The culture pushes this narrative that we should be authentic and vulnerable with everyone, but that's naive. Indiscriminate vulnerability isn't bravery. It's lack of boundaries. The challenge is ensuring that selectiveness doesn't become so extreme that you never let anyone in, because intimacy requires vulnerability. And if the criteria for trust are impossibly high, you might end up alone even when you don't want to be. The balance is developing, the wisdom to discern who is worthy of your vulnerability while remaining open to the possibility that such people exist. Mark 6, Deep Inner World. The sixth mark is the development of an unusually deep inner world. Jung was fascinated by the inner landscape of the psyche, the rich interior life where dreams, symbols, archetypes, and the unconscious interact. Women who've had to be strong alone often develop this inner world more fully than others because they've spent so much time there. When external relationships are unreliable or absent, consciousness turns inward. This isn't escapism. It's the creation of an internal sanctuary. These women are often voracious readers, deep thinkers, creative expressors. They have rich fantasy lives, not in a delusional sense, but in their capacity for imagination and introspection. They can spend hours alone and not feel lonely because they have such a rich internal environment. This manifests in beautiful ways. They're often artists, writers, or creators of some kind. Even if they don't pursue it professionally, they have some form of creative expression that allows them to process and externalize their inner experience. They're philosophical. They think about meaning, purpose, existence. Conversations with them go deep quickly because surface-level chatter feels unsatisfying when you're used to exploring the depths of your own mind. They're comfortable with silence. While others fill every moment with noise or social interaction, these women can sit in silence comfortably because they're never really alone. They always have themselves. I once knew a woman named Elena who exemplified this. She was a successful software engineer, but in her free time she painted, not to sell or exhibit but to process. She told me that her paintings were visual representations of emotional experiences she couldn't articulate in words. Looking at her work was like peering into a soul that had traveled to places most people never go. When I asked if she felt lonely, she said something I've never forgotten. I'm never lonely when I'm alone. I'm only lonely when I'm with people who don't understand the language I'm speaking. Jung called this the development of the transcendent function, the ability to bridge conscious and unconscious, to integrate opposite forces within yourself, to create meaning from experience. The gift is undeniable. These women have profound depth. They're interesting, insightful, and capable of extraordinary creativity and wisdom. The shadow is potential disconnection from external reality. When the inner world becomes more compelling than the outer one, it's possible to retreat too far, to prefer imagination to actuality, to struggle with the messiness of real-world relationships. The integration involves honoring your inner world while remaining engaged with the outer one. Your depth is a gift, share it. Your inner richness can illuminate the world for others if you let it. Mark 7. Mature boundaries. The seventh mark is the development of mature boundaries, and this is where strength becomes truly sophisticated. Boundaries aren't walls. Walls keep everything out indiscriminately. Boundaries are discerning. They allow what's healthy and block what's harmful. Jung understood that psychological health requires clear differentiation between self and other, and women who've had to be strong alone often develop this earlier and more completely than others. Here's what mature boundaries look like. They can say no without guilt or excessive explanation. While many people struggle with people-pleasing or over-justifying their decisions, these women have learned that no is a complete sentence. They understand that preserving their energy and well-being isn't selfish, it's necessary. They don't absorb other people's emotions or problems. They can be empathetic without being enmeshed. They can care about your struggle without making it their responsibility to fix. They end relationships that violate their values or well-being. This might be the most difficult expression of boundaries, the willingness to walk away from people, jobs, situations that aren't serving you, even when walking away is painful. Let me tell you about Patricia. Patricia had been in a friendship for 15 years. But over time, the friendship became one-sided. Her friend would call in crisis after crisis, demanding emotional labor, but never reciprocated when Patricia needed support. For years, Patricia stayed out of loyalty to the history they shared. But eventually, Patricia recognized that loyalty to a relationship that was harming her was actually disloyalty to herself. She had a conversation with her friend, explained the imbalance, and when nothing changed, she created distance. It was heartbreaking, but it was also liberating. Jung would call this individuation in relationship, the recognition that you can love someone and still need to protect yourself from them. Mature boundaries also include not taking responsibility for other people's reactions to your choices. You can care about how your decisions affect others without letting that dictate your choices, respecting your own limits around time, energy, and emotional bandwidth. You know you can't pour from an empty cup, so you prioritize filling your own cup first, understanding that boundaries might upset people, and being okay with that. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries will be upset when you establish them, and that's not your problem to solve. The gift is enormous. These women create lives of integrity where their actions align with their values. They have fewer relationships, but the ones they have are reciprocal and healthy. The challenge can be rigidity. Sometimes in protecting ourselves, we can become so boundaried that we don't allow for human imperfection or second chances. The key is flexible firmness, clear about your limits but open to context and nuance. Mark 8. Quiet confidence. The eighth mark is quiet confidence, and it's perhaps the most powerful of all. This isn't the loud performative confidence of someone trying to prove something. This is the unshakable internal knowing that comes from having survived things you weren't sure you could survive. Jung called this earned selfhood, and shows confidence rooted not in external validation, but in empirical evidence of your own capability. Women who've had to be strong alone have walked through fire. They've faced challenges that would break others. They've had moments of absolute despair, where they had to choose to keep going with no guarantee it would get better. And they did. They survived. They endured. They overcame. That creates a particular kind of confidence characterized by no need to brag or boast. Their accomplishments speak for themselves, and they don't need to advertise their strength. In fact, many people in their lives have no idea what they've been through or overcome. Calm in crisis. When everyone else is panicking, they're the steady presence. not because they're unaffected, but because they've learned that panic doesn't help. They've developed what Jung called the stable center, an internal anchor point that holds steady when everything external is chaotic. Trust in their ability to figure things out. They might not know how to solve a problem immediately, but they trust they'll find a way. This isn't arrogance, it's evidence-based confidence. They've figured out hard things before. They'll figure this out too. I once worked with a woman named Diane who embodied this perfectly. Diane had escaped an abusive marriage, rebuilt her career from scratch, raised her kids as a single mother, and put herself through graduate school. When she entered a room, there was something about her presence, not aggressive, not attention-seeking, just solid. Like a mountain, immovable, certain. When I asked her about it, she said, "I know who I am because I've been tested in ways that revealed exactly what I'm made of. I don't have to wonder if I'm strong enough or capable enough. I have evidence." That's quiet confidence. It doesn't need to announce itself because it simply is. Jung believed this was the ultimate goal of individuation, becoming so fully yourself, so integrated and whole, that you no longer need external validation to know your worth. The beauty of quiet confidence is that it's inspiring without being intimidating. It makes others feel like they might be capable of more than they realized. It's leadership without domination, strength without aggression. The potential shadow is the assumption that you always have to be strong. Even women with quiet confidence are allowed to have moments of weakness, uncertainty, or need. Strength isn't the absence of vulnerability, it's the courage to be vulnerable, despite having been hurt before. The integration is knowing your strength while honoring your humanity. Mark 9, paradoxical softness. The ninth and final mark might seem contradictory to everything we've discussed, but it's actually the culmination, paradoxical softness. The strongest women who've had to stand alone often possess extraordinary gentleness, not weakness, gentleness. There's a difference. Jung understood that the psyche seeks balance, what he called enantiodromia, the tendency of things to turn into their opposite. The hardest experiences can create the softest hearts, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. Here's why. These women know suffering intimately. They know what it feels like to struggle alone, to hurt without comfort, to need help that doesn't come. So when they encounter others in pain, they respond with profound compassion. They see the struggle behind the behavior. They understand that people act out of wounds they might not even recognize. Their softness isn't naivety. They're not soft because they don't know better. They're soft because they do. They've learned that hardness creates more hardness, that cruelty perpetuates cycles of pain. They've chosen softness deliberately, consciously, as an act of strength. This paradoxical softness shows up as exceptional empathy for others who struggle. They're the first to offer help, to reach out, to check in, precisely because they remember what it felt like when no one did that for them. Gentleness with themselves. After years of being their own harsh taskmaster, many eventually learn self-compassion. They speak to themselves more kindly. They allow themselves grace. They recognize their humanity, wisdom about when to be soft and when to be strong. They haven't just developed strength or just maintained softness, they've integrated both. They know when to stand firm and when to yield, when to protect and when to open. Let me end with one final story. I met a woman named Grace who had survived unspeakable trauma, abuse, addiction in her family, homelessness in her teens. She rebuilt her entire life from nothing. And when I met her working as a counselor for at-risk youth, what struck me most wasn't her strength, though that was evident. It was her tenderness. She held space for these kids in a way that was simultaneously firm and soft. She had boundaries, consequences, expectations, but she delivered them wrapped in genuine love. She was the perfect embodiment of fierce compassion. When I asked how she maintained such softness after everything she'd been through, she said bitterness would have been easier. Hardness would have been more protective. But I realized that my trauma doesn't get to dictate who I become. I survived the hard things. I'm not going to become a hard person because of them. That's the ultimate expression of strength. Choosing who you'll be, despite what happened to you. So there they are. The 9 marks of women who had to be strong on their own. According to Carl Jung's understanding of the human psyche, the guarded heart, radical self-reliance, emotional autonomy, hypervigilance, selective vulnerability, deep inner world, mature boundaries, quiet confidence, paradoxical softness. If you recognize yourself in these marks, I want you to understand something. These aren't wounds to heal or flaws to fix. They're evidence of your survival, adaptation, and strength. They're the psychological signatures of someone who faced life's challenges without the support most people take for granted, and who became remarkable because of it, not despite it. But I also want to say this. Just because you had to be strong alone doesn't mean you always have to be. The ultimate expression of strength isn't perpetual independence. It's the courage to let down your guard with people who've proven they're worthy of your trust. It's allowing yourself to be supported without believing that makes you weak. Your strength is incredible, but your vulnerability is brave. And you deserve relationships where both are honored. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And leave a comment telling me which mark resonated most strongly with you. I read every single one. Remember, you are stronger than you know, and you are worthy of the very love and support you so freely give to others. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You're doing better than you think.